Welcome, brave souls, to Angelical Balance, where true horror stories pierce the veil between worlds. I'm your host for today, guiding you through the shadows. Before we unravel tonight's chilling tale, smash that like button if you're ready to be spooked. Drop a comment with where you're tuning in from, your city, country, or maybe a haunted attic. And tell us if you've ever felt a chill you couldn't explain. Got a creepy story of your own? We're one click away. Just email us your tale and I might share it on the channel. Please check the description for the email. Subscribe for more terrifying tales every week. Grab your headphones and let's find the balance between fear and fascination as we dive into the darkness.
Story 1 comes from Marcus Thompson, Redwood National Park, California. I'm writing this from a hotel room in Crescent City, California, 3 days after what happened in the Redwoods. My hands are still shaking, and I haven't slept more than an hour at a time since we left that campsite. The police think I'm crazy. My friends, my former friends, won't return my calls. But I need to tell someone what really happened out there, even if no one believes me. It started as a weekend camping trip that was supposed to be perfect. 5 of us, me, my girlfriend Sarah, my college buddy Jake, his wife Monica, and Sarah's cousin Tyler, had planned this trip for months. We'd reserved a backcountry camping permit for a remote site in Redwood National Park, miles from the nearest trail marker. The ranger who issued our permit seemed hesitant, asking us multiple times if we were experienced campers, if we had satellite phones, if we knew the area. We laughed it off. We were all in our late 20s, fit, experienced hikers. What could go wrong? We should have listened to that ranger. The hike in took most of Friday, 6 miles through old-growth redwoods. The kind of trees that make you feel like an insect, so massive and ancient that they seem to exist in a different dimension of time. The forest was beautiful, but oppressive. The canopy was so thick that even at noon it felt like twilight. Our voices seemed to get swallowed by the enormity of the place. "It's so quiet," Sarah observed as we stopped for a water break around mile 4. She was right. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing, just the sound of our breathing and the occasional creak of wood. "Old-growth forests are like that," Tyler said, adjusting his pack. "The ecosystem is different. Less undergrowth means fewer small animals." It made sense at the time. Now I wonder if the forest wasn't quiet because of ecology, but because everything else knew to stay away from that place. We reached our campsite around 4 p.m., a small clearing beside a creek surrounded by redwoods that shot up like cathedral pillars. It should have been beautiful. It was beautiful, but there was something off about it that I couldn't quite name. The air felt heavier there, and the silence was even more pronounced than on the trail. "This place gives me the creeps," Monica said as we started setting up tents. "It feels like we're being watched." Jake laughed and kissed her forehead. "It's just because it's so isolated. You'll feel better once we get a fire going and some food in you." We set up our 3 tents in a triangle around where we'd build the fire pit. Jake and Monica in one, me and Sarah in another, Tyler by himself in the third. We gathered firewood, purified water from the creek, and by the time the sun set, or what we assumed was sunset, since the forest was so dark we couldn't actually see the sky, we had a decent camp established. Dinner was freeze-dried camping food heated over our portable stove. We sat around the fire as darkness fell completely, trading stories and passing around a flask of whiskey Jake had smuggled in despite the park's alcohol ban. For a while, the unease I'd felt earlier dissipated. This was what we'd come for. Friends, wilderness, escape from the digital world.
Then Tyler heard it first. "Guys, shut up for a second," he said suddenly, holding up his hand. We fell silent. At first, I didn't hear anything, just the crackle of our fire and the distant trickle of the creek. Then I caught it, a sound like branches breaking, but rhythmic, deliberate, something large moving through the forest, coming from the direction we'd hiked in from. "That's probably a deer," Jake said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "That's not a deer," Sarah whispered, gripping my arm. "That's too heavy." The footsteps, and they definitely were footsteps, came closer. We could hear them circling our campsite, staying just beyond the reach of our firelight. Whatever it was, moved in a way that seemed wrong. The steps were too slow, too measured, and they would pause for long stretches, complete silence, before resuming. "Hello?" Tyler called out, his voice cracking slightly. No response, just more of those heavy, deliberate footsteps, circling, circling. "It's gotta be a bear," Monica said, though she didn't sound convinced. "We need to make noise, scare it off." We started banging pots and pans, yelling, making ourselves as large and loud as possible. The footsteps stopped. For maybe 5 minutes, there was nothing but our own noise echoing back to us from the darkness. Then, slowly, the footsteps resumed, but now they were behind us, on the opposite side of our camp. "That's not a bear," I said quietly. "Bears don't circle like that. They don't play games." We spent the rest of that night huddled around the fire, taking turns keeping watch while the others tried to sleep, but none of us really slept. The footsteps continued intermittently throughout the night, sometimes circling, sometimes approaching to just outside our firelight before retreating, sometimes stopping for long periods that somehow were worse than the sound itself. When dawn finally came, a barely perceptible lightening of the darkness, we were exhausted and terrified. The plan had been to camp for 3 nights. We decided unanimously to pack up and hike out that morning. "We'll tell the rangers there was a bear," Jake said as we hurriedly broke down our tents. "They'll understand." We were stuffing our sleeping bags when Sarah pointed at the tree line, her face white. "Oh my God, look!" At the edge of our campsite, where the forest began, there were marks in the soft earth. Footprints. But they weren't bear prints or deer prints or any animal prints I'd ever seen. They were roughly humanoid in shape, but wrong. Too long, too narrow, with what looked like claw marks at the ends. And they were huge, easily 18 inches long. "What the hell made those?" Monica asked, her voice barely above a whisper. None of us had an answer. We just stared at those impossible tracks, circling our campsite in a perfect ring, overlapping in places where whatever made them had passed the same spot multiple times. "We need to leave, now," Tyler said, and nobody argued. We packed faster than I thought possible and hit the trail around 7 a.m., hiking in a tight group, constantly looking over our shoulders. The forest seemed even more oppressive on the way out. The silence had weight, like something was holding its breath, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. Around mile 2, Sarah grabbed my arm and pointed behind us. Far down the trail, barely visible in the dim forest light, something was moving. It was tall, very tall, and it seemed to be walking on 2 legs, but with a strange loping gait that made my stomach turn. "Go," Jake hissed. "Go! Go!" We started running, or as close to running as you can get with full backpacks on rough terrain. Behind us, I could hear it, those same deliberate footsteps, but now faster, crashing through underbrush. It was chasing us. My lungs burned and my legs screamed, but terror kept me moving. We ran for what felt like hours, but was probably 20 minutes, until Tyler tripped on a root and went down hard, crying out in pain. We stopped, helped him up, His ankle was twisted, maybe sprained. He could walk, but not run. And behind us, the footsteps had stopped. The forest was silent again. "It's playing with us," Monica said, tears streaming down her face. "It's hunting us." We hobbled forward as fast as Tyler could manage, supporting him between us. The next 4 miles were a nightmare. Every 100 yards or so, we'd hear it again, those same footsteps, sometimes behind us, sometimes parallel to the trail, once even ahead of us, though we never saw how it could have gotten there. It was toying with us, letting us know that it could catch us whenever it wanted. We finally reached the trailhead around 2 p.m. Our car was there. So was a ranger's truck. The same ranger who issued our permit, a weathered woman in her 50s named Helen, was waiting, leaning against our vehicle. "Thought you folks might come back early," she said, her expression unreadable. "Trail camera caught something following you in yesterday. Something big." "What was it?" Sarah demanded. "What the hell is out there?" Helen was quiet for a long moment, studying us. "How much did you see?" We told her everything. The footsteps, the tracks, the thing following us on the trail. And as we talked, her expression grew darker. "You're the lucky ones," she finally said. "Last group that camped that site 3 years ago. We found their tents, but not them. Equipment all there, no signs of a struggle, just gone. We closed that area after that, but then budget cuts and—" She shook her head. "I tried to warn you. I try to warn everyone."
But nobody wants to believe there's something in these woods that shouldn't be here. "What is it?" I asked. "What's hunting people out there?" "I don't know what it is," Helen said. "Native folks around here have stories about it, but they won't talk to outsiders. Call it a guardian, a spirit, something older than the trees. All I know is that site has a history. People who camp there either leave early, like you, or they don't leave at all." She made us file a report, but when we mentioned the footprints and being chased, she accidentally deleted that part of the recording. "You mention that stuff, they'll think you're crazy. Might even charge you with making a false report. Trust me, keep it simple. Say you saw a large animal and decided to hike out early." We took her advice. The official report says we encountered a possible bear, but that's not what happened. That's not what we saw. Here's the part that still haunts me, the part that makes me check my locks 3 times every night and why I can't sleep without the lights on. The thing followed us home. The first incident was 2 days after we got back. I was in my apartment, alone. Sarah had gone to stay with her parents, said she needed space to process what happened, when I heard scratching at my window. I live on the 4th floor. There's nothing outside that window but a sheer drop to the parking lot. I pulled back the curtain and saw it, just for a second before it retreated into darkness, a face, if you could call it that, elongated, pale, with eyes that reflected my apartment light like an animal's. But it had been too tall to be looking in my 4th floor window unless it was standing on something, except there was nothing outside for it to stand on. Jake called me the next day, frantic. Something had been outside his house all night, he said. He'd called the police, but by the time they arrived, it was gone. All they found were those same tracks circling his house, pressed into the lawn and garden beds. Tyler texted our group chat that he'd woken up to find his front door open, muddy prints leading from the door to his bedroom and back out again. He'd been home alone. All the doors had been locked. Monica stopped responding to messages entirely. It's been 3 days now. I'm in this hotel because I can't go back to my apartment. Last night something knocked on the door. When I looked through the peephole, there was nothing there. But when I pressed my ear to the door, I could hear breathing, heavy, wet breathing,
and underneath it a sound like branches creaking in wind, though we were inside and there was no wind. "Marcus," it said in a voice that sounded like grinding rocks. "Marcus, let me in." It knew my name. This thing from the forest, this impossible thing, it followed us back to civilization, and it knows my name. I don't know what it wants. I don't know why it let us leave the forest if it was just going to hunt us here. Maybe Helen was wrong. Maybe we're not the lucky ones. Maybe the ones who disappeared in the forest got it over with quickly, while we're being slowly, methodically terrorized. Sarah called today. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. She said it was outside her parents' house. She said it looked in her window and smiled. She said it had too many teeth. I'm writing this because I need someone to know what's really out there. If something happens to us, and I think something will happen to us, probably soon, someone should know it wasn't random violence or accidents or any normal explanation. There's something in the old-growth forests of Northern California that doesn't want to be found. And if you find it anyway, if you stumble into its territory and it decides to notice you, it won't let you go. It will follow you home. It will learn your name. It will wait outside your door. And eventually, when you're worn down from fear and lack of sleep and the psychological torture of knowing it's out there waiting, it will come inside. I can hear it in the hotel hallway now. Those familiar footsteps, heavy and deliberate, stopping at each door, getting closer to mine. If you're reading this, please stay out of the deep woods. And if you're planning a camping trip to Redwood National Park, avoid the backcountry sites near Elk Creek. That place belongs to something else. We were trespassing, and now we're paying the price. The footsteps have stopped outside my door. It's knocking. God help me, it's knocking, and I think this time I'm going to have to open it because I can't keep running forever, and I'm so tired, and maybe if I just let it in, maybe if I just face whatever this thing is, maybe it will finally be over. The handle is turning. I didn't unlock it. I know I didn't unlock it, but it's turning anyway, and the door is opening. And oh God, it's so much taller than I thought it has to duck to fit through the doorway. And its face.
Story 2 comes from Jennifer Hayes, Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, Minnesota. I need to start by saying that I'm a rational person. I have a master's degree in environmental science. I've spent my entire adult life studying ecosystems, conducting field research in remote locations, and explaining natural phenomena to people who tend to jump to supernatural conclusions. I am not the kind of person who believes in things that can't be explained by science. But what happened to me and my research partner last August in the Boundary Waters has shaken that rationality to its core. I've spent the last 6 months trying to find a logical explanation for what we experienced, and I keep coming up empty. So I'm writing this down partly as a record, partly as a warning, and partly because I need someone else to know what's out there before I lose my nerve and convince myself it was all some kind of shared hallucination. My name is Jennifer Hayes, and I'm a limnologist. I study freshwater ecosystems. Last summer, I received a grant to conduct a biodiversity survey of several remote lakes in the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness along the Minnesota-Canada border. It's over 1 million acres of pristine wilderness, accessible only by canoe, with more than 1,000 lakes and streams interconnected by portage trails. It's also one of the most isolated places in the lower 48 states. My research partner was a graduate student named Marcus Chen, brilliant and enthusiastic, though this was his first extended wilderness expedition. We planned a 2-week trip, traveling by canoe to 5 different lakes to collect water samples, catalog fish species, and document any changes since the last comprehensive survey 20 years ago. We put in at the Sawbill Lake entry point on August 12th. The first 3 days went perfectly. The weather was ideal, warm but not hot, with clear skies and just enough breeze to keep the mosquitoes manageable. We made good progress, portaging between lakes, setting up camp each night on rocky outcrops overlooking the water. Collecting our samples during the day, Marcus was adapting to wilderness life well, and we were ahead of schedule. On the 4th day, we were supposed to reach Lake 17. That's not its real name, but the actual name would make it too easy to locate, and I'm not sure anyone should go looking for this place. According to our topographic map, Lake 17 was roughly circular, about 2 miles across, with 3 small islands clustered near its center. Our plan was to camp on the largest island and spend 2 days doing intensive sampling. We reached the lake around 2 p.m. after a brutal portage. The lake was beautiful, dark water reflecting the dense pine and birch forest that crowded its shores, the kind of pristine wilderness you see in tourism brochures. And there, right where the map indicated, were 3 islands in the middle of the lake. Except something was wrong. "Jen," Marcus said, studying the map and then the lake, "there should be 3 islands. I'm counting 4. He was right. In addition to the 3 islands marked on our map and on the satellite imagery I'd studied during trip planning, there was a 4th island. It was smaller than the others, maybe 50 yards across, and it sat slightly apart from the cluster, to the northeast. "Must be a mapping error," I said, though I was puzzled. The map was recent, and satellite imagery is generally very accurate for this kind of thing. Or maybe water levels have changed and exposed a rock formation that's usually submerged. It was a reasonable explanation. I believed it at the time. Now I know better. We paddled out to the islands, and I have to admit, the 4th island bothered me from the moment we got close to it. The other 3 islands were typical of the region. Rocky, granite outcrops with thin soil supporting clusters of pine and birch, with blueberry bushes and lichen covering the exposed rock. They looked like they'd been there for 10,000 years since the glaciers retreated. The 4th island looked different. The vegetation was wrong. The trees were too uniform in size, as if they'd all started growing at the same time. The undergrowth was too thick, and it had plants I didn't recognize, which shouldn't have been possible. I'd been studying flora in this region for years, and there was something about the way it sat in the water. It didn't look anchored. I know that sounds insane, but it looked almost like it was floating, like it might drift away if you weren't watching. "We should camp on one of the mapped islands," I told Marcus. "The 4th one doesn't look stable." We chose the largest of the 3 original islands and set up our tents on a flat area near the shore. From our campsite, we had a clear view of all 4 islands, including the strange 4th island. As the sun set and we prepared dinner, I found myself watching that island more and more. In the fading light, it seemed to shift slightly, though that had to be a trick of the shadows and the water movement. "You keep staring at it," Marcus observed as we ate our freeze-dried pasta. "What's bothering you about that island?" "I don't know," I admitted. "It just feels wrong. The vegetation, the position, the fact that it's not on any map, something about it doesn't fit." "Maybe we discovered something," Marcus said with a grin. "We could name it. Chen Island has a nice ring to it." I forced a laugh, but the unease wouldn't leave me. As darkness fell completely, I noticed something else odd. The 3 mapped islands were home to the usual sounds of wilderness at night: loons calling, the occasional splash of a jumping fish, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. But the fourth island was completely silent. No sounds came from it at all. We were both exhausted from the day's portaging and paddling, so we turned in early. My tent was closest to the water, positioned so I could see all 4 islands through the mesh window. I lay in my sleeping bag, watching the islands silhouetted against the star-filled sky, and that's when I noticed the lights. At first, I thought it was bioluminescence in the water, but the lights were on the 4th island, not in the lake. There were small, flickering lights, like candles or fireflies moving through the trees. They'd appear, drift for a second, then vanish, only to reappear somewhere else. I unzipped my tent and crawled out, watching the lights. They were mesmerizing, dancing through the vegetation in patterns that seemed almost choreographed. I was about to wake Marcus when I heard something that stopped me cold. Music. It was faint, barely audible over the gentle lap of water against shore, but it was definitely music. Not any music I recognized. It had no melody I could follow, no rhythm I could tap out. It was more like the memory of music, or the idea of music. Sounds that suggested harmony without actually achieving it. And it was coming from the 4th island. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes, watching the lights and listening to that impossible music until it finally faded away and the lights winked out one by one. When the last light vanished, I realized I was standing at the very edge of our island, my feet inches from the water, with no memory of having walked there. I'd been drawn forward without realizing it, pulled toward the 4th island like iron to a magnet. That scared me enough to scramble back to my tent. I didn't wake Marcus. What would I say? That I'd seen lights and heard music coming from an island that shouldn't exist? You'd think I was losing it. Hell, I thought I was losing it. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I started to drift off, I'd jerk awake with the feeling that something was watching our camp. And twice more before dawn, I heard that strange music drifting across the water. The next morning, I felt groggy and disoriented, but Marcus seemed fine, which meant either he'd slept through the music or I'd hallucinated the whole thing. We spent the morning collecting samples from Lake 17, staying away from the 4th island by unspoken mutual agreement. Or at least I thought it was mutual. Around noon, as we were cataloging fish species from our nets, Marcus said casually, "We should check out that 4th island this afternoon. We need to document it if it's a recently emerged formation." Everything in me screamed to refuse, to say we should stick to the planned research sites. But he was right. If this was a new geological feature, we had an obligation to document it. That's what scientists do. We investigate the unknown. "Fine," I said. "But we stay together, and if anything seems unsafe, we leave immediately." We paddled our canoe to the 4th island around 3 p.m. As we approached, I noticed details I'd missed the day before. The shoreline was wrong. It didn't have the weathered, wave-worn look of the other islands. It looked fresh, almost artificial, like someone had built an island and then aged it artificially. And the vegetation, now that I could see it up close, was even stranger than I'd thought. There were plants growing there that shouldn't exist in northern Minnesota, species I vaguely recognized from tropical or subtropical regions, mixed in with local flora in ways that defied every principle of ecology I'd ever learned. We beached the canoe and stepped onto the island. The ground felt wrong under my feet, too soft, too yielding, not like rock or soil, but something else, something organic. "This is really weird," Marcus said, his earlier enthusiasm fading. "Jen, I don't think this is a natural formation." We moved inland, pushing through the dense undergrowth.
The forest here was dark, despite the afternoon sun, the canopy so thick that barely any light penetrated. And it was quiet, that same oppressive silence I'd noticed the night before. No birds, no insects, no wind in the trees, just our breathing and the sound of branches breaking under our feet. We'd gone maybe 30 yards when we found the clearing. It was perfectly circular, about 20 feet across, with bare soil that looked almost cultivated. In the center was a stone, a single massive stone, roughly rectangular, standing upright like a monolith. It was covered in markings that I initially took for natural weathering, but as I got closer, I realized they were intentional. Symbols, or maybe writing, in no language I had ever seen. "What the hell is this?" Marcus whispered. I had no answer. The stone was clearly very old. The markings were worn almost smooth, but it shouldn't be here. This area had been thoroughly surveyed and mapped. A stone monument like this should have been documented decades ago. I was examining the markings, trying to photograph them with my waterproof camera, when Marcus grabbed my arm. "Jen, look at the trees." I looked. The trees surrounding the clearing, I'd thought they were birch and pine, weren't. They looked like birch and pine from a distance, but up close, the bark texture was wrong. The needle and leaf patterns were wrong, and there was something about the way they stood that seemed deliberately arranged, like they were guarding the stone rather than just growing around it. "We need to leave," I said, "right now." We turned to go back the way we had come, but the forest had changed. The path we had taken to reach the clearing was gone. Instead, there were trees. Too many trees, packed too close together, their branches interlocking overhead to create an impenetrable canopy. We'd only been in the clearing for maybe 10 minutes, but somehow the forest had rearranged itself. "This isn't possible," Marcus said, and I could hear the panic rising in his voice. "This isn't possible." We tried to push through the undergrowth in what we thought was the direction of our canoe, but the vegetation seemed to actively resist us. Branches snagged our clothes, roots seemed to shift under our feet to trip us, and thorny vines we didn't remember seeing on the way in appeared everywhere. After 20 minutes of struggling, we were both bleeding from dozens of scratches, exhausted and completely disoriented. "The stone," I said, breathing hard. "We need to go back to the stone. It's the only landmark we have." We fought our way back to the clearing, which was easier than leaving it, I noticed, and stood there, trying to think. The sun was lower now, maybe 2 hours from setting. If we didn't get off this island before dark, I had a terrible feeling we'd never leave. That's when Marcus noticed the markings on the stone were glowing. It was subtle at first, just a faint luminescence in the carved symbols, barely visible in the late afternoon light. But as we watched, it grew brighter, and the strange music I'd heard the night before began to emanate from the stone itself. The same atonal, melodyless sound that suggested music without actually being music. "We need to get out of here," Marcus said, and this time I didn't argue. We picked a direction at random and ran. The forest seemed to open before us, not like it had for our arrival, but deliberately, almost mockingly. We crashed through undergrowth and between trees, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst, until suddenly we broke through to the shoreline. But we weren't where we'd left our canoe.
We were on the opposite side of the island, and our canoe was nowhere in sight. We'd have to circle the island to reach it, assuming it was still there. The sun was touching the horizon now, painting the lake in shades of red and gold. We had maybe 45 minutes of good light left. We ran along the shoreline, stumbling over rocks and exposed roots. I kept looking over my shoulder, certain that something was following us through the forest, though I never saw anything.
just shadows moving between the trees, always at the edge of vision, always keeping pace with us. We finally found our canoe, right where we'd left it, which made no sense, given how far we'd run along the shore. It was as if the island had rotated while we were inland, or the shoreline had rearranged itself, or space itself didn't work properly on this place. We didn't stop to theorize. We threw ourselves into the canoe and paddled like our lives depended on it, which I think they did. As we pulled away from the fourth island, I looked back and saw figures standing at the water's edge. They were tall and thin, almost impossibly thin, and they stood perfectly still, watching us leave. In the fading light, I couldn't make out any details. No faces, no clothing, just dark shapes against the darker forest. We paddled back to our campsite on the original island, but we didn't stop there either. We loaded our gear into the canoe with shaking hands, abandoning anything that wasn't essential, and kept paddling. We paddled through the twilight and into full darkness, using our headlamps to navigate, until we reached the portage trail that would take us to the next lake. We didn't stop until we were 3 lakes away from Lake 17, and even then, we only stopped because we were too exhausted to continue. We didn't sleep that night. We huddled in our tents, listening to the normal sounds of a normal wilderness night, and both of us jumped at every noise. When dawn came, we packed up and headed for the exit point, abandoning the research trip entirely. We didn't talk about what happened on the fourth island, not during the 2-day paddle out, not during the long drive back to Minneapolis, not when we filed our incomplete research report. What would we say? That we found an island that wasn't on any map? That the forest rearranged itself to trap us? That we saw figures watching us that weren't quite human? We'd be laughed out of our careers. But I couldn't let it go. Back home, I spent weeks researching Lake 17. I found historical records going back to the 1800s when the first European explorers mapped the area. In every map, every survey, every satellite image, there were only 3 islands on Lake 17, except for one. I found a journal entry from a French fur trader named Baptiste Lacroix, dated 1823. He described camping on Lake 17 and seeing what he called l'île qui marche, the island that walks. He wrote that it appeared in the middle of the lake where no island had been before, stayed for 3 days, and then vanished. His Ojibwe guides refused to go near it, saying it was a place where the boundary between worlds was thin, where spirits could cross over. I found 2 other historical references to a 4th island appearing on Lake 17, one from 1889 and another from 1947. In both cases, the island appeared, remained for a few days, and then vanished. The 1947 account mentioned that a pair of fishermen went to investigate the island and were never seen again. I tried to contact Marcus to share what I'd learned, but he wouldn't respond to my calls or emails. Finally, his roommate told me Marcus had dropped out of the graduate program and moved back to California. He'd told his roommate that he couldn't study lakes anymore, that every time he looked at water, he saw things that shouldn't be there. I haven't been back to the Boundary Waters. I can't go back, but I monitor satellite imagery of Lake 17, checking it weekly. For 6 months after our trip, the lake showed only 3 islands. Then, last week, the 4th island appeared again. It's there right now, visible on current satellite imagery, sitting in the exact same spot where we found it last August. I've been watching the news, checking missing persons reports for northern Minnesota, terrified that I'll see stories of hikers or canoeists who disappeared in the Boundary Waters. So far, nothing. But the island is there,
waiting. And I know, with a certainty I can't explain scientifically, that it's hungry, that it appears when it needs to feed, when the boundary between this world and wherever it came from grows thin enough for it to cross over. And it will keep appearing, keep drawing people to investigate it, keep trapping them in its impossible forest, until it's satisfied. I'm writing this as a warning. If you're planning to canoe in the Boundary Waters, if you're going anywhere near Lake 17, though I'm not giving you the real name, and I pray you never find it, and you see a fourth island that's not on your map, stay away. Don't investigate it. Don't try to document it. Don't let curiosity override your survival instinct. The island that walks doesn't obey the rules of our world. It's a place where space and time and nature itself bend and break. It's a trap, a lure, a doorway to somewhere we were never meant to go. And if you're foolish enough to set foot on it, if you walk into that impossible forest and find that stone in its clearing, you might not come back. Or worse, you might come back changed, haunted by the memory of what you saw there, unable to look at wild places the same way again. I still have nightmares about those figures standing on the shore watching us paddle away. In my dreams, we don't make it off the island. We're still there, trapped in that rearranging forest, circling that glowing stone forever while the music plays and the lights dance and something ancient and hungry closes in. The Boundary Waters are beautiful, pristine, one of the last truly wild places in our country. But wilderness means more than just the absence of civilization. It means there are places and things that don't follow the rules we've made up to explain the world. And some of those places should stay unexplored. I've given up limnology. I can't do field work anymore. Instead, I've taken a desk job, analyzing data other people collect. I let other researchers risk the wild places while I stay safe in my office. Some might call that cowardice. I call it survival. If you see an island that shouldn't exist, remember me. Remember Marcus. Remember those fishermen from 1947, and paddle away as fast as you can, because the fourth island is still out there, still appearing and disappearing according to rules we don't understand, and it's always hungry for more visitors.
Story 3 comes from David Patterson, Great Smoky Mountains National Park, Tennessee. I'm a park ranger. I've been one for 15 years, working in various national parks across the country before settling into my current position at Great Smoky Mountains National Park 3 years ago. I'm telling you this up front because I need you to understand that I'm not some inexperienced hiker who panicked at normal wilderness sounds. I know these mountains. I know how to read trails, how to predict weather, how to identify every animal that lives in these forests. I know the difference between a black bear moving through underbrush and a human trying to move quietly. I know what belongs in these woods and what doesn't. What I found at Cataloochee Valley last October doesn't belong anywhere. The Smokies get millions of visitors every year, and most of them stick to the popular spots: Cades Cove, Clingman's Dome, the Laurel Falls Trail. But there are dozens of backcountry campsites scattered throughout the park's 800 square miles, accessible only by hiking, used mainly by serious backpackers who want solitude. These sites are primitive, just a cleared area with a fire ring, maybe a cable for hanging food away from bears. No facilities, no water, nothing but you and the wilderness. Site 41 in Cataloochee Valley was one of these backcountry locations. Was being the operative word, because it's closed now, permanently. The official reason listed in park records is trail erosion and safety concerns, but that's a lie. I know it's a lie because I'm the one who recommended we close it, and erosion had nothing to do with my recommendation. The trouble started in early October when we got a distress call from a hiker who'd activated his emergency beacon. He'd been camping at Site 41 with his girlfriend, and according to the garbled message he managed to send before his battery died, something had happened to her. He was incoherent, almost screaming into the radio, saying she was stuck and he couldn't get her out. I was part of the rescue team that hiked in. It's about 4 miles from the nearest road to Site 41, following Pretty Hollow Creek up into a valley surrounded by ridges thick with old-growth forest. It's beautiful country, the kind of place that reminds you why people fall in love with these mountains. But that day, hiking in with my emergency pack and first aid gear, I felt uneasy in a way I couldn't quite name. The forest was too quiet. Even the creek seemed muted, like the sound was being absorbed by something. We found the hiker, his name was James Whitmore, 28 years old, from Knoxville, sitting on a log at the campsite, rocking back and forth, his hands bloody and his eyes unfocused. He didn't seem to register our arrival until I touched his shoulder, and then he grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "She's still in there," he said. "She's been in there since last night. I tried to pull her out, but she's stuck and she won't stop screaming and—" "Slow down," I said, using my calm the panicked hiker voice. "Where is she? Where's your girlfriend?" He pointed at his tent. The tent was one of those modern ultra-light models, barely big enough for 2 people, made of thin nylon and bright orange. It was zipped shut. I could see no obvious damage to it, no signs of a struggle, but I could hear something from inside, a sound like sobbing or maybe whimpering, muffled but constant. "Sarah?" I called out. "Sarah, this is Ranger Patterson. We're here to help you. Can you come out of the tent?" The sobbing stopped. For a moment there was complete silence. Then a voice came from inside the tent, female, young, but with a strange quality to it, like it was coming from very far away or through water. "I can't," the voice said. "I can't get out. It won't let me." I looked at James. "What does she mean it won't let her? Is she injured?" "Just look," he said, his voice cracking. "Unzip the tent and look." I've done hundreds of search and rescue operations. I've seen broken bones, bear attacks, hypothermia, heart attacks, you name it. I thought I was prepared for anything. I wasn't prepared for what I found when I unzipped that tent. The interior was wrong. That's the only way I can describe it. The tent should be maybe 7 feet long and 4 feet wide at the base, a confined space that you could see all of in one glance. But when I opened it and looked inside, the interior stretched back impossibly far. The orange nylon walls extended into a distance that shouldn't exist, fading into darkness that the afternoon sun couldn't penetrate. And there, maybe 15 feet back, though 15 feet should have put her outside the tent entirely, through the other side and into the forest beyond, was Sarah Mitchell, 26 years old, a graduate student from Atlanta. She was on her hands and knees, her face streaked with tears and dirt, looking at me with an expression of pure terror. "Help me," she said. "Please help me. I've been trying to crawl out since last night, but I can't reach the door. The tent keeps getting longer." I'm not ashamed to admit I stumbled backwards, almost falling. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It violated every law of physics, every principle of reality. A tent is a tent, a fixed space with defined dimensions. It can't be bigger on the inside than the outside. It can't stretch impossibly into darkness that shouldn't exist. But that's exactly what I was looking at. "How long has she been like this?" I asked James, not taking my eyes off the impossible space inside that tent. "Since we woke up this morning," he said. "We went to sleep normal, both of us in the tent. When we woke up, she was back there, far away. She tried to crawl out, and I tried to reach in and grab her, but—" He held up his bloody hands. "Something in there cut my hands. I couldn't see what. Just reached in to try to pull her out and felt something sharp slice my hands, and she kept crawling but not getting any closer."
The other rangers had joined me now, all of them staring at the tent with expressions that ranged from confusion to outright disbelief. Sarah was still in there, still crying, still on her hands and knees in that impossible space. "Sarah, I need you to stay calm," I called to her. "We're going to get you out. Can you see the opening? Can you see us?" "Yes," she sobbed. "You're right there. I can see you. But every time I crawl toward you, you get farther away. I've been crawling for hours. I'm exhausted. Please, please, get me out of here." We tried everything we could think of. We tried reaching in to grab her. But like James had experienced, there was something in that space that cut anyone who reached past the threshold. Jake Morrison, one of the other rangers, has scars on his forearm from where something slashed him. 3 parallel cuts, deep and clean like from razor-sharp claws, but we never saw what made them. We tried tying a rope to Sarah's ankle and pulling her out, but the rope just kept feeding into the tent endlessly, hundreds of feet of rope disappearing into that small space, until we ran out of rope and still hadn't reached the end of it. We tried cutting the tent open from the sides and back, thinking we could make a new exit closer to where she was. But when we cut the fabric, there was nothing behind it but more darkness. We cut a 3-foot gash in the back of the tent, and instead of seeing the forest that should have been right there, we saw only black emptiness that our flashlights couldn't penetrate. As afternoon turned into evening, Sarah's condition deteriorated. She was becoming hypothermic. Even though it was mild October weather outside, she reported that it was freezing wherever she was. She was weak from exhaustion and dehydration, and she was starting to see things in the darkness behind her. "There's something back there," she told us, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's been getting closer all day. I can hear it moving. Please, you have to get me out before it reaches me." We tried everything we could think of. We tried reaching in to grab her, but like James had experienced, there was something in that space that cut anyone who reached past the threshold. Jake Morrison, one of the other rangers, has scars on his forearm from where something slashed him. 3 parallel cuts, deep and clean like from razor-sharp claws. But we never saw what made them. We tried tying a rope to Sarah's ankle and pulling her out, but the rope just kept feeding into the tent endlessly. Hundreds of feet of rope disappearing into that small space, until we ran out of rope and still hadn't reached the end of it. We tried cutting the tent open from the sides and back, thinking we could make a new exit closer to where she was. But when we cut the fabric, there was nothing behind it but more darkness. We cut a 3-foot gash in the back of the tent, and instead of seeing the forest that should have been right there, we saw only black emptiness that our flashlights couldn't penetrate. As afternoon turned into evening, Sarah's condition deteriorated. She was becoming hypothermic. Even though it was mild October weather outside, she reported that it was freezing wherever she was. She was weak from exhaustion and dehydration, and she was starting to see things in the darkness behind her. "There's something back there," she told us, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's been getting closer all day. I can hear it moving. Please, you have to get me out before it reaches me." We called for additional resources, technical rescue teams, even suggested bringing in engineers or physicists, anyone who might understand what was happening. But headquarters thought we were joking or having some kind of mass hysteria. A tent that's bigger on the inside? A woman trapped in impossible space? It sounded insane even as we reported it. By the time the sun set, we'd been working for 6 hours and had made no progress. Sarah was barely conscious, slumped on her side in that endless tent, her lips blue with cold. And the thing she'd been hearing in the darkness, we could hear it now too. A sound like breathing, heavy and wet, and something dragging across fabric. It was behind her, in the depths of that impossible space, and it was getting closer. "We have to collapse the tent," Jake said. "Just pull out the stakes, drop the whole structure, see if that breaks whatever this is." "If we do that, we might crush her," I argued, "or trap her even worse than she is now." "She's dying in there anyway," Jake snapped back. "We have to try something." He was right. We were out of options. I called out to Sarah, told her what we were about to do, told her to cover her head and stay as flat as possible. She didn't respond. I don't think she could hear us anymore, or maybe she was too far gone to answer. We pulled the stakes. The tent collapsed like any normal tent would, the poles folding, the fabric settling into a crumpled heap of orange nylon on the ground, a heap that should have had Sarah's body visible somewhere in it. But when we carefully pulled back the fabric, trying to find her, there was nothing there. The tent was completely empty. Sarah Mitchell was gone. We searched that campsite for 3 days. We had dogs, we had thermal imaging, we had 50 people combing every inch of the valley. We never found a trace of her. Not a footprint, not a piece of clothing, nothing. It was like she'd never existed, except we had James's testimony and we had the photographs that Jake had thought to take on his phone showing that impossible interior of the tent with Sarah visible in the distance. The official report said she wandered off and got lost, that she succumbed to exposure somewhere in the backcountry, and we haven't located the body yet. James Whitmore was briefly investigated for foul play, but there was no evidence, and honestly, his genuine horror and guilt were obvious to anyone who interviewed him. Last I heard, he'd left Tennessee entirely and moved to Arizona, about as far from mountains and forests as you can get. We closed Site 41 immediately. My recommendation was to close it permanently, and that's what happened. The official reason is trail erosion, but I made sure the closure was documented in ways that would make it nearly impossible for anyone to reopen that site. That should have been the end of it. A tragedy, an unexplained disappearance, one of those mysteries that occasionally happen in wild places. But it wasn't the end. A month after Sarah vanished, we got a report of strange noises at Site 41. Despite the closure, some hikers had ignored the signs and camped there anyway. They reported hearing a woman crying inside their tent in the middle of the night, begging for help. When they investigated, they found nothing, but the crying continued until dawn. 2 weeks after that, another group camped there. They packed up and hiked out in the middle of the night, abandoning most of their gear. When we questioned them, they said their tent had grown during the night, that they had woken up to find themselves much farther from the door than they should have been, that the interior was stretching, and the darkness was full of movement.
We reinforced the closure, put up more signs, started doing regular patrols to turn away anyone heading toward Site 41. But people kept doing there anyway. Maybe because of the closure itself. Forbidden places have a way of attracting exactly the kind of people who shouldn't go to them. And they kept reporting impossible things. Tents that expanded, sleeping bags that seemed to sink into the ground, slowly swallowing anyone inside them, the sound of breathing that came from the earth itself. And most commonly, the crying, a woman's voice calling for help, begging to be pulled out, saying she'd been crawling for so long and was so tired, and could someone please help her? I heard it myself 2 months ago. I'd gone to Site 41 to post new signs and to check on reports of illegal camping. It was late afternoon,
and I was alone, which maybe wasn't the smartest decision in retrospect. The campsite looked abandoned, no tents, no gear, no signs of recent use. But as I was hammering in the new signs, I heard it. "Hello? Is someone there? I need help." The voice came from the fire ring, an old metal ring set into the ground, full of cold ashes from fires long dead. I approached cautiously and looked into it. The interior of that fire ring should have been maybe 18 inches deep. Instead, it was a tunnel, dropping straight down into darkness that went far deeper than should be possible. And far below, so far that she should have been invisible in the darkness, but somehow wasn't, I could see her. Sarah Mitchell, still on her hands and knees, still crying, still trying to crawl out. "Sarah?" I called down into that impossible depth. She looked up, and even from that distance I could see the hope flash across her face, followed immediately by crushing despair. "You," she said, her voice echoing strangely from the depths. "You tried to help me before. In the tent. That was—" She paused, confusion crossing her face. "That was yesterday, wasn't it? Or was it longer? I can't remember. I've been crawling for so long." "Sarah, that was 3 months ago," I said gently. No, that's not right. I just woke up in the tent this morning. James was here, and then you came, and then—" She trailed off, looking around at the darkness surrounding her. "Where am I? Why is it so dark? Why can't I reach the door?" I didn't know what to say. Was this really Sarah Mitchell, somehow trapped in impossible space beneath a fire ring, with no memory of the time that had passed? Or was it something else? Something wearing her face and voice, something that had learned to mimic her from whatever had taken her. "Help me," she begged. "Please, I'm so cold, and there's something behind me. I can hear it breathing. Please don't leave me here." I wanted to help her. God, I wanted to reach down into that impossible depth and pull her out. But I remembered what had happened to Jake's arm, remembered the invisible claws that had cut him, and I remembered that even when we had dozens of people and all our equipment, we hadn't been able to save her. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "I'm so sorry, Sarah." I left. I ran back down the trail like something was chasing me, even though nothing was. But I could hear her calling after me, her voice echoing up from that impossible depth, begging me not to leave her alone in the dark. I reported what I saw, but I don't think anyone believed me. They think the stress of the original incident has made me unstable, that I'm seeing and hearing things that aren't there. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am losing my mind. But I don't think so. I think something is wrong with Site 41. I think the boundaries of reality are thinner there, or broken, or twisted into shapes they were never meant to take. I think Sarah Mitchell is trapped somewhere between here and somewhere else, doomed to eternally crawl toward an exit she'll never reach, while something in the darkness behind her gets slowly closer. And it's spreading. Last week, we got a report from Site 39, about 2 miles from Site 41. Campers reported that their tent seemed larger than normal during the night, that they'd heard crying, that when they looked closely at the fire ring, they could see something moving in the ashes, something pale and thin crawling. 2 days ago, it was Site 37. Similar reports. The phenomenon, whatever it is moving through the backcountry, spreading from site to site like an infection. We're quietly closing more campsites, making up excuses about bear activity or trail maintenance. But we can't close the whole valley, and we can't tell people the real reason without causing a panic or
sounding insane. So I'm telling you instead. I'm telling everyone who'll listen. If you camp in the Smokies, if you set up your tent in one of those backcountry sites, and you wake up in the middle of the night to find yourself farther from the door than you should be, get out immediately. Don't try to figure out what's happening. Don't investigate. Don't let curiosity override your survival instinct. And if you hear crying, if you hear someone begging for help from impossible places, from inside your tent, from under your sleeping bag, from the depths of the fire ring, don't try to help them. You can't. Whatever's happening to them has already happened, or is happening in a way that doesn't follow the rules of normal time and space. You'll just be the next person trapped in that endless crawl toward an exit you keep receding. Site 41 remembers Sarah Mitchell. It keeps her trapped in that moment of desperate crawling, replaying it over and over. Or maybe she's still living it, experiencing every second of those months as if they're all happening simultaneously. And now other sites are learning to do the same thing. They're becoming spaces where reality doesn't work correctly, where the inside of a tent or a sleeping bag or a fire ring can be bigger than the outside, where you can crawl forever and never reach the end. I've requested a transfer to a different park, somewhere flat, somewhere with no backcountry, somewhere where I won't have to worry about what's growing in the darkness beneath the campfires and inside the tents. I don't know if I'll get it. The Park Service doesn't like rangers who talk about impossible things, who filed reports about spaces that don't obey physics. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know that somewhere in the impossible space beneath a fire ring in Cataloochee Valley, Sarah Mitchell is still crawling, still crying, still begging for help that will never come. The mountains don't care about us. The old-timers who have lived here for generations know that. They have stories about places in these hills where the world works differently, where you can walk into hollers that don't appear on any map, where you can hear your name called by voices that come from nowhere and everywhere at once. I used to think those were just stories, folklore, superstition. Now I know better. The Smokies are old, older than human memory, older than our maps and trails and campsites. And in some places, that age has worn reality thin, made it permeable, created spaces where the normal rules don't apply. Site 41 is one of those places, and it's teaching other places to be the same way. So please, if you're planning to camp in these mountains, be careful. Pay attention to the closures, even if the reasons seem vague or arbitrary. And if you wake up in the night to find your tent has grown larger, if you hear crying from impossible places, if you see pale shapes crawling in the depths where depths shouldn't exist, get out. Run. Don't look back. Because the campground remembers everyone who stays, and it never lets them leave. I still hear her sometimes, even though I'm miles away from Site 41 now. In the quiet moments before sleep, I hear Sarah's voice echoing up from impossible depths, begging for help, saying she's been crawling for so long and she's so tired, and there's something in the darkness behind her getting closer. And I know that somewhere in those mountains, in a place where reality has torn like old fabric, she's still there, still crawling, still hoping someone will save her. But no one can, because she's not in our world anymore. She's in the space between, in the impossible distances that open up when reality breaks. The campground has her now, and it's hungry for more.
Story 4 comes from Rebecca Torres,
Olympic National Forest, Washington. My name is Rebecca Torres, and I'm a cartographer. I create maps for hiking guidebooks and outdoor recreation companies, which means I spend a lot of time on trails that most people have never heard of, verifying GPS coordinates, noting landmarks, and documenting trail conditions. It's solitary work, but I love it. Or at least, I used to love it. After what happened on the Winding Creek Trail in Olympic National Forest last September, I'm not sure I can ever look at a trail map the same way again. Olympic National Forest in Washington State is a sprawling wilderness of temperate rainforest, alpine meadows, and rugged mountains. It's less famous than Olympic National Park, but it has hundreds of miles of trails, many of them remote and lightly used. The Winding Creek Trail was one of these, a moderate 8-mile loop that followed a creek through old-growth forest before climbing to a ridge with views of the surrounding peaks. It was perfect for my purposes, long enough to be worth documenting, remote enough that I wouldn't encounter many other hikers, and supposedly scenic enough to be worth including in the guidebook I was working on. I started the hike early on a Tuesday morning in mid-September. The weather forecast was good, partly cloudy, temperatures in the 60s, no rain predicted. I had my GPS unit, my camera, my notebook, and enough supplies for a long day hike. I'd done this dozens of times before on other trails. I expected nothing unusual. The trailhead was empty when I arrived, which wasn't surprising for a Tuesday in the off-season. There was a weathered wooden sign with the trail name and distance, Winding Creek Loop, 8.2 miles, and a faded map showing the route as a rough circle with the trailhead at the bottom. The map was old enough that some of the details were hard to read, but I had my own GPS and topographic maps, so I wasn't worried. The first mile was unremarkable. The trail followed Winding Creek through dense forest, mostly hemlock and Douglas fir, with sword ferns creating a thick understory. The creek itself was low due to the dry summer, just a trickle over moss-covered rocks. I took photographs at regular intervals, noted landmarks, and marked waypoints on my GPS, standard procedure. Around mile 2, the trail began to climb away from the creek, switchbacking up the ridge. This was steeper than the guidebook I was updating had indicated, so I made notes to correct that. The forest was beautiful here, massive old trees that must have been hundreds of years old, their trunks thick with moss, and their branches creating a canopy so dense that the morning light came through in scattered beams. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, I found myself feeling increasingly uneasy, though I couldn't say why. I've spent enough time alone in the wilderness that I'm familiar with the vague anxiety that can come from isolation. Usually I can rationalize it away. It's just your brain adjusting to solitude, just your primitive instincts on alert because there's no tribe around you. But this felt different. This felt like something was specifically wrong, though I couldn't identify what. At mile 3, I reached what should have been the high point of the ridge. According to my maps, there should be a rocky outcrop here with views to the north and east. Instead, I found myself still in dense forest, the trail continuing upward with no view in sight. I checked my GPS. The elevation was right for where I should be, but the landmarks weren't matching. I figured the maps were just outdated. It happens, especially with lesser-known trails. And I kept going. By mile 4, I should have started descending back toward the creek. The trail did start going downhill, which matched expectations, but something felt wrong about the descent. The trees looked the same as they had on the way up. Same species, same size, same spacing. In most forests, you notice variations as you change elevation, different understory plants, different light conditions. But this forest was uniform
in a way that seemed unnatural. I reached the creek again around what my GPS said was mile 5.3, but when I looked at the creek, I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't just similar to the creek I'd started at, it looked identical. Same rocks, same moss patterns, same low water level. And there, on the bank, was a boot print. My boot print. I recognized it because my hiking boots have a distinctive tread pattern, and this print was fresh, pressed into the mud beside the water. I stood there for several minutes trying to make sense of this. The only explanation was that the trail had looped back on itself more tightly than the map had indicated, that I'd somehow circled around and come back to a point near the trailhead. But my GPS said I'd traveled 5 miles, and the elevation changes matched the ridge I'd climbed. I couldn't be back at the starting point. It didn't make sense. I decided to keep going. Maybe the trail followed the creek for a while before diverging again. Maybe I was just disoriented. But as I hiked alongside the creek, I started noticing more familiar things. A distinctive crooked hemlock tree that I'd photographed earlier. A boulder with a specific pattern of lichen. A fallen log that I'd stepped over. These weren't just similar features. They were the exact same landmarks I documented in the first mile of trail. I was retracing my own route. I stopped and pulled out my GPS unit, studying it carefully. According to the GPS, I was at mile 5.3 of the trail, heading in the correct direction at an elevation that matched the described route. But the landmarks around me were undeniably from mile 1. I took out my camera and reviewed the photos I'd taken. There was the crooked hemlock, photographed at timestamp 8:47 a.m. when I was at mile 0.8 of the trail. And there it was in front of me now, at 11:23 a.m.
I was hiking in a loop, but not the 8-mile loop described on the map. I was somehow looping back over my own trail in a way that shouldn't be geographically possible. I sat down on a log to think. The rational explanations were limited. Either my GPS was malfunctioning, giving me false distance and elevation readings, while I'd actually just been wandering in circles, or what? There was no or. The GPS had to be wrong. I decided to test it. I took out my knife and carved a distinctive X on the trunk of a nearby tree, about chest height where I couldn't miss it. Then I continued hiking in the direction the trail led, paying careful attention to every landmark. According to my GPS, I was now at mile 5.5, then 6.0, then 6.5. The forest remained monotonously similar. Same trees, same ferns, same dim green light filtering through the canopy. At mile 7.0, I should have been nearing the trailhead. Instead, I found myself approaching Winding Creek again. And there, on a tree beside the trail, was the X I'd carved, fresh, unmistakable, exactly as I'd left it. I'd hiked 2 miles and ended up in the exact same spot. My hands started shaking as I stared at that carved X. This wasn't a GPS malfunction. I'd physically traveled. I could feel the fatigue in my legs, the miles I'd covered. But somehow, impossibly, the trail had brought me back to the same point. I decided to try something different. Instead of following the trail, I would head directly downhill through the forest. Winding Creek flowed downward toward the valley where the trailhead was located. If I followed the creek downstream, ignoring the trail entirely, I had to eventually reach the trailhead. It was simple logic. Water flows downhill. Follow water downstream, you reach lower elevations. Reach lower elevations in this valley, you hit the forest road where I'd parked. I left the trail and pushed through the underbrush, keeping the creek on my left and heading downhill.
The terrain was rougher here, full of fallen logs and thick ferns that soaked my pants legs, but I was willing to deal with that if it meant escaping whatever strange loop the trail had caught me in. I bushwhacked for what felt like half an hour, struggling over obstacles, getting scratched by branches, but always keeping the creek on my left and heading downhill. Then the forest opened up slightly, and I found myself stepping onto a maintained trail. The winding creek trail, the exact same section where I'd carved the X. But I'd been traveling perpendicular to the trail, through pathless forest. I should have crossed the trail at a different point, or not crossed it at all, if it truly looped the way the map indicated. Instead, I'd somehow ended up at the exact same spot. I looked at the creek, then back at the trail, then at my GPS, which now read mile 7.8. I'd traveled almost 3 miles total since carving that X, but I'd gone nowhere. The sun was lower now, afternoon fading toward evening. I'd been hiking for over 6 hours and, by all measurable evidence, not left this small section of trail at all. Panic started to rise in my chest. I forced it down. Panic wouldn't help. I needed to think. I tried heading a different direction, uphill this time, climbing the ridge on a diagonal away from both the trail and the creek. The slope was steep, and after 20 minutes of hard climbing, my legs burning with effort, I emerged onto level ground. I was on the trail, the winding creek trail, exactly where the X was carved on the tree. I tried heading downstream along the creek, carefully staying in the creek bed itself, wading through the shallow water, figuring that if I stayed in the water, I couldn't somehow end up back on the trail. After 30 minutes of cold, wet slogging, the creek bed opened up into a slightly wider section, and there, on the bank, was the trail. And the X. No matter which direction I went, no matter how carefully I tried to navigate away from this spot, I ended up back here. The forest was looping me somehow, bending geography in ways that shouldn't be possible. The sun was getting low. In another hour, maybe 2, it would be dark. I had a headlamp, but the thought of being trapped in this impossible loop in the darkness terrified me. I decided to try one more thing. I would follow the trail exactly as it was marked, but I would leave a clear indication at regular intervals that I'd passed that point. I used my knife to carve arrows on trees, all pointing in the direction I was walking. If the trail really was looping back on itself, I'd see arrows pointing in the wrong direction when I came back around. I started walking, carving an arrow every 100 paces. The trail led me along the creek and then began climbing toward the ridge. I carved arrows on trees as I climbed. The forest around me remained unchanged. Same massive hemlocks, same sword ferns, same green dimness filtering through the canopy. After what my GPS said was a mile, I'd carved roughly 30 arrows, all pointing in the direction I'd been traveling. The trail leveled out and began descending again. And there, on a tree ahead, was an arrow, carved exactly as I'd been carving them, pointing toward me. I approached it slowly, my heart hammering. I examined the cut. It was fresh, the exposed wood still pale and moist. This wasn't an old carving from another hiker. This was my work. But I'd been carving arrows that pointed in the direction I was walking, and this arrow was pointing back at me, which meant the trail had somehow flipped, or I'd been turned around without realizing it.
Or space itself was folded in a way that made direction meaningless. I continued forward, my mouth dry with fear. More arrows appeared, all pointing toward me now, meeting me as I walked. I was following my own trail backward, except I hadn't turned around. Or had I? Could I have gotten confused, spun around without noticing? Then I saw something that made my blood freeze. 2 arrows on the same tree, carved one above the other, but they pointed in opposite directions. I had been walking in a straight line, or what felt like a straight line, but somehow the trail had twisted so that I'd passed this same tree from 2 different directions. Space was pretzel twisted here, bent back on itself in impossible ways. The sun touched the tops of the trees. Maybe an hour of good light left. I needed to make a decision. I could try to keep navigating, keep searching for a way out, but every attempt had failed. Or I could accept that I was trapped here and prepare to spend the night, hoping that whatever was causing this phenomenon would end by morning. I didn't want to stay here overnight. The thought of being trapped in this looping section of trail in the darkness, unable to escape, maybe forever walking the same steps over and over, filled me with a primal terror. But I was exhausted, mentally and physically, and I was running out of options. That's when I heard the footsteps. They came from further up the trail, where it disappeared around a bend. Heavy footsteps, the sound of hiking boots on packed earth. Someone else was here. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking with relief. "Hello! I need help! I'm lost!" The footsteps stopped. For a moment there was silence. Then they started again, coming closer. A figure appeared around the bend, backlit by the fading sun so I couldn't make out details. A hiker. Tall, with a large pack. "Oh, thank God," I said, starting toward them. "I've been trapped here for hours. The trail keeps looping back on itself. I can't find the trailhead. Do you have a working GPS, a phone with signal? I stopped talking as the figure came closer and the light hit them properly. It was me. Not someone who looked like me, not a doppelganger or a twin. It was me, Rebecca Torres, wearing the exact same clothes I was wearing, with the same backpack, the same GPS unit clipped to my belt, the same knife in my hand that I'd been using to carve arrows. The other me stopped about 10 feet away and stared at me with an expression of absolute terror. The same terror I knew was on my own face. "You're me," we said simultaneously. We stood there, mirror images, both of us shaking, both of us trying to process the impossible. I could see every detail of her, of me, the scratch on my left hand from pushing through underbrush, the mud on my boots, the way my hair had come loose from its ponytail. This wasn't a hallucination. This was real. "How long have you been here?" I asked. 6 hours, she said. "I started at the trailhead this morning. The trail keeps looping. I can't get out." "I started this morning too, 6 hours ago." We stared at each other. The implications sinking in. We'd both started this morning. We'd both been trapped for 6 hours. We'd both carved arrows on trees and ended up back at the same spot. We were the same person, experiencing the same loop, somehow made simultaneous. "There are more," she said quietly, and pointed behind me. I turned. On the trail behind me, where I'd just come from, I could see another figure approaching. Me again. And behind her, another. And another. The trail was full of me. Dozens of me, all trapped in the same loop, all experiencing the same 6 hours, all arriving at this meeting point at the same time. Some looked fresh and relatively calm. They'd just started noticing the loop. Others looked exhausted and wild-eyed. They'd been trapped longer, however that worked in this place where time didn't seem to flow normally. "We need to work together," one of me said. She looked like she'd been crying, her eyes red and swollen. "If we all go in different directions at the same time, maybe one of us will break through." "I tried that," said another me, older looking somehow, her face gaunt. "I've tried everything. The trail just keeps adding more of us, more loops, more versions. We're all stuck." "How long have you been here?" I asked her. "I don't know," she said, her voice hollow. "Days? Weeks?" I stopped counting. Time doesn't work right here. I sleep, I wake up, I'm back at the start, except I'm not at the start because there are more of me every time.
We're multiplying. The loop is creating copies and trapping them all. I felt like I was going to be sick. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. But there they were. There we were. Dozens of me stretching along the trail in both directions, all trapped in the same impossible loop. The sun was setting now, the forest growing dark, and in the dimness, I could see that there were even more versions of me further along the trail. Hundreds, maybe. A crowd of Rebecca Torres, all lost on the winding creek trail, all unable to escape.
"We have to try something," I said desperately. "There has to be a way out. We can't just give up." "Why not?" asked one of the gaunt, exhausted versions. "What else is there? We're caught. The trail has us. It loops forever, and we loop with it. And it keeps making more of us to fill the loop. Eventually, there will be thousands of us, all walking the same 8 miles forever, never reaching the end." "No," I said firmly, though I didn't feel firm. "There's always a way out. We just haven't found it yet." But even as I said it, I could feel the truth settling over me like a heavy blanket. I was trapped. We were all trapped. The winding creek trail didn't loop through space, it looped through possibility, creating a new version of me each time I tried to exit, each copy doomed to repeat the same futile attempts at escape. That was 3 months ago. I'm still here. We're all still here. The trail is crowded now with versions of me, thousands of us, maybe tens of thousands. We've spread out along the loop to avoid bumping into each other constantly, but no matter where you stand on this trail, you can see other versions of yourself ahead and behind, all walking the same direction, all trying futilely to reach the end. Some of the older versions have given up. They just sit by the creek staring at nothing. Some have gone mad. I can hear them laughing or crying in the distance. Some have tried to leave the trail and never come back, and I don't know if that means they escaped or if they're lost in the woods between loops, trapped in some other impossible space. I keep walking. It's all I know how to do. GPS says I've traveled thousands of miles now, but I'm always on the same 8-mile loop. I've carved so many arrows on trees that some trees are more carving than bark. I've left messages for myself, warnings that don't matter because every version of me has to learn the same lessons. Sometimes I meet newer versions of myself, ones who've only been trapped for hours or days. They still have hope. They still think there must be a way out. I don't tell them about the years. Has it been years? Time doesn't work right here. That some of us have been walking. I don't tell them about the versions that are so old they barely look human anymore. Their bodies worn down by infinite walking, their minds reduced to simple forward motion. I'm writing this on the back of my trail map with a pencil that should have run out long ago, but somehow never does, just like my food and water somehow never run out, just like my boots never wear through despite the thousands of miles. The trail sustains us because it needs us to keep walking, to keep populating its loop, to keep being trapped. I don't know if anyone will ever read this. I don't know if there's an out there anymore, or if the entire universe has collapsed down to these 8 miles of trail and the infinite versions of me walking them. But I'm leaving this message at the trailhead, or what used to be the trailhead before it became just another point on the endless loop. If you're planning to hike the Winding Creek Trail in Olympic National Forest, don't. It's not on the maps anymore, or at least it shouldn't be. I think the trail has removed itself from normal geography. But if you find it somehow, if you see that weathered wooden sign promising an 8-mile loop, turn around. The trail doesn't end. It never ends. It just keeps looping, and you'll loop with it, and you'll meet yourself coming and going. And eventually there will be so many of you that you'll forget which one is the original. You'll forget which direction is forward and which is back. You'll forget everything except the trail and the walking and the terrible knowledge that you'll never reach the end because the end is also the beginning. I can see myself in the distance coming around the bend,
A new version, fresh and confused. She doesn't know yet that she'll be here forever, that we'll all be here forever, walking and walking and walking and never arriving. The Winding Creek Trail loops forever. And now, so do I.
Story 5 comes from Michael Crawford, Apostle Islands National Lakeshore, Wisconsin. I'm a Great Lakes sailor, have been for 20 years. I've sailed through storms that sent waves crashing over the bow, navigated through ice floes in early spring, and weathered equipment failures miles from shore. I know these waters, Superior, Michigan, Huron, Erie, and Ontario, better than I know the streets of my hometown. I respect them, fear them in a healthy way, and understand that the Great Lakes are inland seas that can kill you as easily as any ocean. But I never believed the old stories, the tales that sailors have been telling for generations about things in the fog, about ships that vanish without a trace, about voices calling from the water. I thought those were just ghost stories, the kind of superstitious nonsense that builds up around dangerous waters where too many people have died. I don't think that anymore. My name is Michael Crawford, and I'm writing this from a hospital room in Bayfield, Wisconsin. I've been here for 2 weeks since the Coast Guard found me. They say I'm lucky to be alive, that another few hours in the water would have killed me. But I don't feel lucky. I feel haunted. And I need to tell someone what really happened out there before they convince me it was hypothermia-induced hallucination or some kind of mental breakdown. It started as a routine late-season sailing trip. Me and 3 friends, Tom Hendricks, Sarah Chen, and Jake Morrison, had planned a 5-day cruise through the Apostle Islands in Lake Superior. It was mid-October, later than most people would choose to sail these waters, but we were all experienced, and the weather forecast looked acceptable. Cool but clear, light winds, no storms predicted. The Apostle Islands are a cluster of 22 islands off the Wisconsin coast of Lake Superior, protected as a national lakeshore. They're beautiful, rocky shores, sea caves, old-growth forests, historic lighthouses. In summer, the islands are full of kayakers and tour boats. By October, they're almost deserted. That's when we liked to sail there, when we could anchor in quiet coves and have entire islands to ourselves. We launched from Bayfield on a Wednesday morning in my 32-foot sailboat, the Windward. She was a solid cruiser, well-maintained with all the safety equipment required and then some. We'd sailed together dozens of times. We knew each other's sailing styles, trusted each other completely. We should have been fine. The first 2 days were perfect. We sailed from island to island, exploring sea caves, hiking wooded trails, anchoring in protected bays at night. The water was cold. Superior never really warms up, even in summer. But the weather was calm, and the autumn colors on the islands were spectacular. We saw bald eagles, black bears on the shoreline, even a moose swimming between islands. On Friday, we were anchored in a cove on Stockton Island, the largest of the Apostles. We'd spent the day hiking and were planning to sail to Devil's Island the next morning to see the famous sea caves there. The weather forecast still looked good. A high-pressure system was supposed to keep conditions stable through the weekend. We woke Saturday to fog. That's not unusual on Superior. The lake creates its own weather, and fog banks can roll in without warning, especially in fall when the water temperature differs significantly from the air. We'd sailed in fog before. It's not ideal, but with GPS, radar, and proper navigation, it's manageable. Except this fog was different. It came in during the night, and by morning it was so thick we couldn't see the bow of the boat from the cockpit.
The windward was only 32 feet long, and we couldn't see from stern to bow. That's exceptionally dense fog, the kind where visibility is measured in feet, not yards. "We should wait it out," Sarah said, as we sat in the cabin drinking coffee. "Forecast says it should burn off by noon," Tom added, checking his phone. "We've got all day, no rush." It was the sensible decision. We had plenty of food and water, a comfortable boat, and no reason to risk navigating blind through islands with rocky shores. So we waited. By noon, the fog hadn't thinned. If anything, it seemed denser. The world outside our boat had vanished completely. We couldn't see the water, couldn't see the shore of the island we'd anchored near, couldn't see anything beyond a few feet of gray emptiness. "This is weird," Jake said, standing at the companionway and staring into the fog. "I've never seen it this thick for this long." "Superior fog can last for days," I said, though I was starting to feel uneasy, too. This wasn't normal fog. Normal fog moves, shifts, has variations in density. This was like being inside a gray room with walls made of mist. It didn't move at all. By evening, the fog remained unchanged. We'd been socked in for almost 24 hours. The weather forecast kept promising that it would clear, but it didn't. We made dinner, played cards, tried to keep spirits up, but we were all feeling it, that creeping sense of unease that comes from being cut off from the world, surrounded by impenetrable grayness. "Anyone else hear that?" Sarah said suddenly, holding up her hand for silence. We listened. At first I heard nothing but the gentle lap of water against the hull. Then I caught it, a sound like singing, very faint, coming from somewhere in the fog. Multiple voices, harmonizing, but no words I could make out, just the rise and fall of melody, beautiful and eerie. "Probably people on another boat," Tom said, but he didn't sound convinced. "In this fog," Jake said, "who else would be crazy enough to be out here?" The singing continued for several minutes, seeming to circle our boat, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away. Then it faded and stopped. We sat in silence for a long time after that, listening, but heard nothing more. None of us slept well that night. I kept waiting to the sound of things bumping against the hull. Not hard, just soft thuds like something gently exploring the boat. Probably just debris floating in the water, I told myself. Logs or branches. Nothing unusual. But in the morning, when the fog was still there, still impossibly thick, still unmoving, I went up on deck to check for damage and found something that made my skin crawl. Handprints on the hull, just above the waterline. Dozens of them, made in what looked like mud or algae, covering the side of the boat, small hands like a child's, pressed against the white fiberglass and leaving dark smudges. "What the hell?" Tom said, coming up behind me.
We examined the prints carefully. They were definitely handprints, 5 fingers, clearly defined, all roughly the same size. They covered a 20-foot section of the hull, starting at the waterline and going up about 4 feet, concentrated around where we'd heard the bumping sounds during the night. "Kids?" Sarah suggested weakly. "Maybe some kids in a kayak? In the middle of the night? In this fog?" I said. "And where would they have come from? We're miles from shore, anchored in deep water." We tried to wash the prints off, but the substance wouldn't come off easily. It was oily, slick, and it smelled like lake bottom, like rotting vegetation and ancient mud. As I scrubbed at one of the prints, I noticed something else. The fingers were too long. Child-sized hands, but with fingers that would have been grotesquely elongated on a human child. "We need to leave," Jake said quietly. "Now, I don't care about the fog.
We need to get out of here. I agreed. Whatever had left those prints, whatever was in the water around our boat, I didn't want to stay here another night. We'd motor carefully, use the GPS and radar, and head back to Bayfield. It would be slow going and zero visibility, but we had electronic navigation. We'd be fine. We pulled up the anchor and started the engine. The GPS showed our position clearly. We were in the cove on the north side of Stockton Island, about 8 miles from Bayfield. I plotted a course that would take us around the island and then across open water to the harbor. We motored into the fog, moving at less than 3 knots, watching the depth sounder and the GPS carefully. The fog swallowed us completely. Within minutes, we couldn't even see the island we just left. There was only the boat, the gray void around us, and the rumble of the engine. After what the GPS said was 2 hours of travel, we should have been approaching Bayfield, but there was no sight of land. No change in the fog, just endless gray in every direction. "Check the GPS," Sarah said, an edge of panic in her voice. I checked. According to the GPS, we'd traveled nearly 6 miles. We should be close to Bayfield Harbor, but there was nothing but fog. "Maybe we passed it," Tom suggested. "Could we have passed the harbor in this visibility?" It seemed unlikely. We'd been following the GPS track exactly. But I turned the boat around and headed back the way we had come. Another hour of slow motoring. Still nothing but fog. No land, no other boats, no sounds except our engine and the lap of water. I checked the GPS again. It showed us in the middle of Lake Superior, miles from any land. But that was impossible. We'd only been motoring for 3 hours and we'd started 8 miles from shore. Even if we'd somehow gotten turned around, we should be seeing land somewhere. "The GPS must be malfunctioning," I said, though I'd checked it before we left and it had been working perfectly. "We'll have to navigate by compass." But when I checked the compass, the needle was spinning slowly, never settling on any direction. I tapped it, thinking it was stuck. The needle just kept spinning, clockwise, slow and steady, as if north itself was moving. "Mike," Jake said from the bow, his voice tight, "come look at this." I went forward and looked where he was pointing. In the fog ahead, something was moving. Not the fog itself, but something in it. Shapes, barely visible, human-sized, but wrong somehow. They were keeping pace with the boat, moving through the fog parallel to us, always staying just at the edge of visibility. "What are they?" Sarah whispered. "I don't know." We watched the shapes move. There were dozens of them now, surrounding the boat, walking or swimming or floating, I couldn't tell, through the fog. They stayed at the same distance, never getting closer, never falling behind, just maintaining their eerie parallel movement. Then the singing started again. The same wordless harmonizing coming from the shapes in the fog, growing louder. It was beautiful and horrible at the same time, a sound that made me want to cry and scream simultaneously. "Cover your ears," I said, doing so myself. "Don't listen to it." But the singing penetrated even covered ears. It wasn't just sound, it was in my head somehow, bypassing my ears entirely. And with the singing came an urge, a pull, a desire to go to it, to join it, to step off the boat and walk into the fog and become part of that chorus. I saw Tom's hand reaching for the rail, preparing to climb over. "Tom, no!" I grabbed him, pulled him back. He fought me, his eyes glazed, his mouth open as if preparing to sing. Jake helped me wrestle him to the deck and hold him there. The singing grew louder, more insistent. Sarah was at the rail now, one leg over it. Jake lunged for her, but she was too quick. She went over the side into the water with barely a splash. "Sarah!" Jake screamed, rushing to the side. "Sarah, come back!" We could hear her in the water, swimming away from the boat, towards the shapes in the fog.
She was singing now too, her voice joining the chorus. Jake was preparing to jump in after her, and I could see in his eyes the same glazed compulsion. "We have to stop the boat," I shouted at Tom, who was still on the deck but struggling against my grip. "Cut the engine!" I lunged for the cockpit and killed the engine. In the sudden silence, the singing seemed even louder, but without the motor noise, I could hear something else in the fog. Other voices, screaming, human voices, terrified, calling for help. "Help us!" a man voice cried from the fog. "Please, we're drowning!" "Help! Our boat capsized! We're in the water! Help!" "Don't listen," I shouted at Tom and Jake. "It's not real. It's trying to lure us in." But Jake was over the side before I could stop him, swimming towards the voices, towards Sarah, towards the shapes in the fog. Tom broke free from my grip and followed.
I was alone on the boat. The singing and the screaming continued, surrounding me. The shapes in the fog were closer now, and I could see them more clearly. They looked human from a distance, but they weren't. They were tall and thin, with skin that looked wet and gray. Their hands, those elongated hands that had left prints on my hull, reached toward the boat, beckoning. "Come," they sang in voices that harmonized impossibly. "Come into the water. Come join us. Come sing with us forever." I could feel the pull of it. Every fiber of my being wanted to go to them, to join that beautiful, terrible song, but I forced myself to turn away, to go below deck, to close the companionway hatch and seal myself inside. In the cabin, the singing was muffled, but still present. I could hear Tom, Sarah, and Jake outside, their voices joining the chorus. I could hear them moving in the water around the boat, singing, calling my name, begging me to join them. I wedged myself into the farthest corner of the cabin and covered my ears and hummed loudly to block out the sound. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Hours, maybe days. Time didn't seem to work right in that fog. I'd check my watch and find that hours had passed in what felt like minutes, or minutes had passed in what felt like hours. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I fell into something like sleep, though it was full of dreams of singing and drowning and pale shapes with two long fingers pulling me down into dark water. When I woke, it was silent. I cautiously opened the companionway hatch and looked out. The fog was gone. The sun was shining. I was floating in clear water on a calm day, surrounded by the familiar shapes of the Apostle Islands. But I was alone. Tom's boat was gone. Sarah was gone. Jake was gone. The Windward's dinghy was still secured on deck. They hadn't taken it. They'd simply gone over the side and vanished into the fog. I searched the water around the boat, calling their names, but there was no response. No bodies, no life jackets, no debris, just clear water and sunshine and the normal sounds of Lake Superior on a calm October day. I checked the GPS. It was working normally, showing me exactly where I was, in the cove on the north side of Stockton Island, the same place we'd been anchored when the fog rolled in. According to my watch, it was Sunday afternoon. We'd been in the fog for just over 24 hours. But the supplies in the cabin told a different story. We'd gone through a week's worth of food and water. The battery that powered the electronics was nearly dead, as if it had been running for days. My beard, which had been stubble when the fog came in, was now over an inch long. I radioed the Coast Guard. They found me 3 hours later, dehydrated and incoherent, babbling about singing in the fog and shapes in the water. They searched the area for my missing crew, but found nothing. No bodies, no life jackets, no debris, just clear water and sunshine,
and no free phone chargers. The handprints on my hull were still there when the Coast Guard arrived. They photographed them, took samples of the residue, but the analysis came back inconclusive. Organic matter, possibly algae or bacterial colony, composition unknown. The report noted that the handprints were unusual, but offered no explanation for how they got there or why they looked like children's hands with elongated fingers. I've been in this hospital for 2 weeks now. The doctors say I'm physically fine, just dehydrated and suffering from exposure, but they're keeping me here for psychiatric evaluation. They think I had some kind of breakdown, that the stress of losing my friends drove me temporarily insane, that I'm creating false memories to explain what I can't accept. Maybe they're right. Maybe the fog was just normal fog, and my friends died in a tragic accident that I've blocked out, and my mind created the singing and the shapes to give their deaths meaning. Maybe the handprints were just algae blooms that happened to look like handprints. Maybe everything can be explained rationally, but I don't believe that. I've been researching the Apostle Islands, reading everything I can find about their history. I found stories, lots of them, going back generations. Stories about fog that doesn't move, about singing in the water, about people who vanish from boats without a trace. The Native Americans who lived here before European contact had legends about water spirits who would call people into the lake, who would take tribute in the form of the drowned. In 1928, a fishing boat out of Bayfield reported being trapped in fog for 3 days near Stockton Island. When the fog cleared, half the crew was gone. The survivors reported hearing singing and seeing shapes in the fog, but they were dismissed as being drunk or suffering from exposure. In 1967, a sailing yacht with 4 people aboard was found drifting near Devil's Island. Sails set, engine running, but completely deserted. No distress call, no sign of struggle, just an empty boat. Witnesses reported that area had been socked in with heavy fog for the 2 days before the boat was found. In 1989, 3 kayakers disappeared near Stockton Island during a fog bank. Their kayaks were found, undamaged, floating in formation, as if they'd simply climbed out mid-paddle and swum away. One of the kayaks had muddy handprints on its hull, small hands with elongated fingers. There are dozens more, maybe hundreds if you go back far enough. The fog comes, people vanish, and nobody talks about it because nobody wants to believe that there's something in Lake Superior that hunts in the fog, that calls with beautiful singing, that takes people and never gives them back. I'm being released from the hospital tomorrow. They've concluded I'm not a danger to myself or others, that I'm processing my trauma in an unconventional but not pathological way. They're recommending therapy and grief counseling.
I'm not going back to Bayfield. I'm not going near Lake Superior ever again. I've sold the Windward, or rather, I'm trying to sell it, but nobody wants a boat with a reputation for being cursed. The handprints are still there. I tried to remove them, tried everything from bleach to sandpaper, but they come back overnight, fresh and clear, as if something is marking the boat as its own. I miss my friends. Tom, Sarah, and Jake, they were good people, experienced sailors, and they didn't deserve whatever happened to them in that fog. I hope they died quickly, that they drowned before whatever took them could do anything worse. But I don't think they did. I think they're still out there, in whatever exists inside that fog, singing forever, calling to other boats, other sailors, trying to make others join them.
If you sail the Great Lakes, if you cruise the Apostle Islands, and you wake up to find yourself surrounded by fog that doesn't move, that doesn't shift, that's so thick you can't see your own hands, don't wait for it to clear. Don't trust your instruments. Don't listen to any sounds you hear in that fog, no matter how beautiful or how desperate. Start your engine or raise your sails and pick a direction, any direction, and go as fast as you can. Don't stop for anything. Don't investigate anything. Don't try to help anyone you hear calling from the water. Just run. And if you hear singing, if you feel that pull to join it, to walk into the water and become part of something ancient and terrible and beautiful, fight it. Fight it with everything you have. Because if you give in, you'll sing forever. You'll be trapped in the fog, calling to others, trying to make them join you because you're so lonely and the singing never stops and you can't remember anymore who you were before you drowned. The fog takes. That's what the old sailors say. The fog takes and it never gives back. Tom, Sarah, and Jake, if some part of you is still in there, still conscious, still capable of hearing me, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry I closed that hatch and stayed below while you swam away into the gray. I'm sorry that I'm here and you're not. I hear the singing sometimes, even now, even in this hospital room miles from the lake. Late at night when the building is quiet, I hear it drifting through my dreams. That same wordless harmonizing, beautiful and terrible, calling me back. And some part of me wants to answer. Some part of me wants to drive back to Bayfield, to take a boat out to those islands, to wait for the fog and let it take me too. Because at least then I'd be with my friends again. At least then I wouldn't be alone with the memory of their voices joining that chorus, with the knowledge that I survived and they didn't. But I won't go back. I won't let it have me, because someone needs to tell the story, needs to warn people about what's out there in the fog. Someone needs to remember that Tom, Sarah, and Jake were real people who died in a way that can't be explained, that shouldn't be possible, but happened anyway. The fog is still there. It rolls in over Lake Superior several times a year, sometimes more. It settles over the Apostle Islands and waits. And when boats are caught in it, some of them don't come back. The people aboard them don't come back. They're singing now, all of them. All the lost sailors and kayakers and fishermen who vanished into that fog over the years, they're all singing together, adding their voices to the chorus, calling for more to join them. And the fog keeps taking. It will never stop taking, because that's what it does. That's what it's always done, and it will keep doing it until people learn to respect the warnings, to turn back when they see that unmoving gray wall rolling across the water, to understand that some places aren't meant for humans, that some things in this world don't follow rules we understand. Lake Superior is the largest freshwater lake in the world by surface area. It's cold and deep and ancient, and it holds on to its dead. Bodies that sink in Superior often don't resurface because the cold water prevents the gases that cause flotation. The lake keeps what it takes. And when the fog comes, it takes more than just bodies. It takes voices. It takes songs. It takes people and turns them into something else, something that exists in that gray space between the water and the air, between the living and the dead. I survived. I got out, but I'm not sure I really escaped because the singing follows me and the fog is patient, and someday I might not be strong enough to resist the call. If I disappear, if they find me floating in some landlocked lake miles from Superior, drowned in clear water on a sunny day, you'll know what happened. You'll know that the fog came for me after all, that it called me back, and I finally answered. Until then, I'm telling everyone who'll listen, stay away from the Apostle Islands when the fog rolls in. Stay away from Lake Superior in October, when the water temperature and the air temperature create conditions for those thick, unnatural fog banks. And if you hear singing in the fog, if you see shapes moving just beyond your vision, if you feel hands with 2 long fingers pressing against your hull in the night, run. Run as fast as you can, and pray that you're fast enough. Because the fog is hungry, and it's always looking for more voices to add to its song.